wrong, but it worked.
Oh, it works now. Okay.
Podemos começar?
Now we are live in YouTube, on YouTube.
Hello, everyone. My name is José Ricardo. I'm very honored to moderate this session, this plenary session number 2, which is about the BRICS and the global governance. We have here with us today Professor Alexsander Sergunin, who is a professor from the Department of International Relations of the School of International Relations of St. Petersburg State University. Besides, we do also have Professor Fábio Borges, who is a professor, a BRICS observer from the Federal University from Latin American Integration, UNILA. We do also have Professor Evandro Menezes de Carvalho, who is a professor at Getúlio Vargas Foundation, School of Law, FGV Direito Rio, and also at Fluminense Federal University School of Law, UFI. Besides, we do, last but not least, we do also have Professor Cássio Eduardo, who is a researcher at the Center for BRICS Studies of the University of São Paulo, GEBRICS USP. Later on, I'm going to read the mini bio from each professor who is joining us here. So we may start discussing right now about the BRICS governance with Professor Alexsander Sergunin, who is very welcome to our 4th conference of the BRICS 2020. Professor Alexsander, he is a professor of international relations from St. Petersburg State University in Russia. He received his PhD in history from the Moscow State University and habilitation in political science from the St. Petersburg State University. His fields of research and teaching include international relations theory and Russian foreign policy thinking and making. His most recent book-length publications include the first one, Explaining Russian Foreign Policy Behavior, Theory and Practice. Secondly, Russia in the Arctic, Hard or Soft Power. Third, Russian Strategies in the Arctic, Avoiding a New Cold War. Fourth, Contemporary Military Strategy. And fifth, Contemporary International Relations Theories. Professor Sergunin, you're very welcome, and please, I'm gonna pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can see my presentation. Are you able to see it?
Yes, we can see it perfectly, Professor.
Okay. The purpose of my presentation is to critically review some preliminary results of Russia's BRICS chairmanship in the current year, 2020, and to assess the COVID-19's impact on Moscow's presidential agenda. When Russian expert community and politicians started preparations for the Russian presidential agenda this year, and the preparation started much earlier in 2018, 2019. So they were, they had plans to radically change the very agenda of the Russian presidency, because they believed that BRICS reached in its development some kind of plateau, some kind of crucial point. It depended whether Russia would be able to come up with the new initiatives, with the new impressive chairmanship agenda or not. Because many skeptics at that time, they predicted that the Russian presidency will be a failure, or will be useless, or will be lacking some kind of far-reaching initiatives. So when the Russian presidential agenda was published at the very end of 2019, it had 3 major priorities. The first one is strengthening multilateral principles in global politics and promoting shared interests of the BRICS countries in international fora. In other words, it's coordination of BRICS activities on the global arena and in the field of global security. More specifically, this priority had several sub-priorities, such as to promote the unifying agenda based on the universally recognized principles and norms of the international law and the interests of all states, then to promote the central role of the United Nations in international relations, to consolidate collective efforts to respond to global and regional challenges and threats, to deepen cooperation between the BRICS countries in countering terrorism, extremism, corruption, cross-border crime, and illicit drug and arms trafficking. To continue with this priority, Russia planned to strengthen collaboration in space exploration and peaceful use of outer space. To continue the dialogue on the security in the use of information and communication technologies and countering cybercrime. To enhance BRICS countries' coordination mechanisms in key international fora. To develop cooperation with partner countries in the BRICS Plus and outreach dialogue formats. And finally, to enhance dialogue on the issues of international development cooperation. In other words, to promote a sustainable development. Then the second priority related to the cooperation in trade, economy, and finance, and included sub-priorities such as to renew the strategy for BRICS economic partnership, which was over this year. It was designed for 5 years, 2015-2020. Then to facilitate trade and investment between the BRICS countries, to promote the potential of the new development bank, to enhance the BRICS contingent reserve arrangement mechanisms, to develop and integrate BRICS national payment systems, to launch practical activities of BRICS Women's Business Alliance, and to promote the economic development of the remote areas within BRICS. To continue this priority, Russia planned to strengthen cooperation among the BRICS tax, customs, and the anti-monopoly line agencies, to promote cooperation in the field of energy, to develop cooperation in the digital economy and innovations, to strengthen ties in healthcare, including by taking joint measures in fighting infectious and non-infectious disease. It's quite strange and surprisingly, but this priority was already there even before the start of the pandemic. To encourage dialogue among the 5 countries on agriculture and food security. And finally, to strengthen contacts in the field of prevention and elimination of consequences of emergencies and natural disasters. And the third priority was had also quite impressive sub-agenda in the field of cooperation in culture, humanitarian sphere, in education, and strengthening people-to-people contacts. Things like development of inter-parliamentary cooperation, promotion of cultural cooperation, enhancing cooperation in the field of education, further development of BRICS network university activities, strengthening youth contacts, deepening cooperation in sports and holding BRICS games, promotion cooperation with public diplomacy formats, and development of contacts among representatives of BRICS journalism community. However, the realities of the pandemic era have changed these priorities and made impossible implementation of some of them. Let me just briefly mention some negative implications of the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced Russia and other BRICS countries to change these priorities for cooperation. First of all, we have to admit that re-nationalization of world economics and politics took place, including those ones in the BRICS countries, and of course, weakening of global governance institutions and regimes. And the BRICS, as one of the mechanisms of global governance, also was weakened because each country had to focus on its national problems. Then there was a clear change of priorities from the economic growth, innovation, progress in technologies and science, to things like healthcare and fighting coronavirus pandemic. So the funds, resources, financial resources, and other resources had to be switched to this threat prevention. Then the third negative trend was securitization of non-security or soft security sectors. Because of the number of negative spillover effects coming from competition between leading economic powers and strengthening or sharpening geopolitical competition between major poles of power. And especially it was true for the relationship between the United States and China. As you might know, the Trump administration in the US decided to put blame on China for unjust economic competition and for launching this coronavirus pandemic. So, as you might know, the Trump administration called for the international community to punish China and to make it responsible for the current pandemic, and asked the allies and partner countries to join this campaign. And of course, this was a very serious problem for the BRICS cooperation, because some of the BRICS countries, they were quite hesitant about whether they had to focus on the national problems or maintain a certain level of international cooperation, including the fighting of pandemics. One more challenge or threat which the COVID-19 pandemic posed is the challenges to human rights, civil society institutions, and democracy. Because to fight a pandemic, the state had to restrict or limit some democratic freedoms and human rights in order to curb this pandemic. And experts, they started to talk about the threat of digital totalitarianism and the rise of so-called biopolitics, and the change in the focus of international competition to the sphere of biopolitics. And some countries, they started to blame, like the United States, that biopolitics is used by some countries like China or Russia to increase their influence in the world politics. So a lot of fake news, a lot of fake theories and concepts started to circulate in international discourse. However, along with these negative implications of pandemics, we can identify some modest achievements in the BRICS cooperation, including the Russian agenda for his presidency. For example, if you look at the first priority, strengthening global multilateral mechanisms and global security, I would identify several positive tendencies. First of all, the role of some United Nations bodies, especially the World Health Organization, was increased. And in that sense, the global governance structures were not weakened. On the contrary, World Health Organization became a focal point in fighting pandemics and coordinating of international activities to curb this pandemic, and helping different countries which cannot afford full-fledged healthcare system and obtain some medicine and some medical devices to stop this pandemic. Secondly, I would mention that the BRICS countries revived a number of conflict resolution mechanisms. For example, in August, the deputy foreign ministers of the BRICS countries had a special virtual conference, online conference on the Middle East, and they discussed a number of very important issues, ranging from the help or assistance programs to the Middle East countries to fight COVID-19 pandemic, to discussion of specific international conflicts in this area, such as in Libya, in Syria, in South Yemen, in Iraq, and Israeli-Palestinian dialogue. Also, the BRICS countries discussed the ongoing conflict or crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh, and by the way, even United Nations and the UN Security Council was quite agreed on the need to stop this conflict and start a peaceful resolution of this conflict. As you might know, UN Security Council had several meetings on Nagorno-Karabakh, and all major UN Security Council members were quite united in their opinion how to stop this conflict. Unfortunately, it's still going on, but the very fact that major powers were able to reach a compromise and reach agreement on this conflict is quite interesting and remarkable. Also, the BRICS countries are quite successful in designing a common BRICS counterterrorism strategy. In September 2020, they had a special conference, online conference on this issue, and adopted this strategy. Of course, the implementation of the strategy is remain to be seen, and it will be implemented in the future. But paradoxically, the prohibition of intensive movement of people between different countries because of the pandemic restrictions somehow eased this problem because terrorists, they couldn't move freely between the countries, and this to some extent made this problem less evident and less obvious for the BRICS countries. Of course, it's not a solution to the problem, but that kind of paradoxical implication of the COVID-19 pandemics can be identified. Also, BRICS countries continue to coordinate the activities in many international fora, such as the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, WTO, and G20. So I guess this priority is strengthening the global multilateral mechanisms and global security to some extent was quite successful, regardless that most of these efforts, they were transformed into the virtual ones. The second priority, trade, economic and financial cooperation, also had some achievements. For example, the focus of this cooperation moved from purely trade, economic and financial cooperation towards the common efforts to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, China was quite successful in curbing this epidemic inside this country. Russia was also rather efficient as compared to other countries in stopping this the first wave of pandemic. It remains to be seen whether the second wave of pandemic will be stopped successfully or not. But at least the Russian government states that it's ready to cope with this threat, with the second wave of pandemic. Also, Russia succeeded in developing several vaccines, and also the work on the development of the joint Sino-Russian vaccine is going on. And both Russia and China stated that upon the industrial production of these vaccines, they will share with vaccines, first of all, with the close neighbors and also with the members of the BRICS formation, the BRICS grouping. Then also we can identify things like completion of the strategy for BRICS economic partnership, as I mentioned, which was over this year, and the new strategy for the next 5 years will be adopted in the forthcoming BRICS summit, which will be held in the virtual format on November 9th this year. And they have a quite impressive agenda for this next 5 years. Also interesting that the industry ministers had a virtual meeting in August 2020, and they adopted a joint declaration on new industrial revolution, and also noted several specific measures how to cope with the challenges of the new industrial age. Also, the adoption of the roadmap for BRICS energy cooperation up to 2025 was a very important achievement, because this roadmap has a very concrete, very specific steps to develop different forms of energy cooperation, including renewable energy sources and also alternative energy sources. Regardless of the pandemic challenges, further development of the new development bank, contingent reserves arrangement, BRICS bond fund in national currencies, BRICS single payment system also took place during this year. BRICS ministers of agriculture and agrarian development continued their coordination activities, and in September 2020 they had a special meeting and adopted a joint plan how to develop agricultures in these countries. Also, Minister of Labor and Employment held an online meeting this month to discuss how the challenges and threats of post-COVID era should be met in the sphere of labor and employment. Finally, the third priority, education, culture, people-to-people contact. Of course, this area was challenged most of all because people-to-people contacts and cooperation in this field, the field of education, culture, was undermined by the pandemic. But anyway, it should be noted that the BRICS countries were able to transform this cooperation, these contacts into the virtual format, and they successfully held a number of very important events, such as Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, which took place today, and a joint declaration was adopted by this assembly. Also, BRICS Virtual University also got some development, and especially this cooperation was very fruitful in the field of online education and teaching, and very interesting virtual platforms for teaching and learning were shared between different BRICS countries. And for example, my university benefited a lot from that kind of cooperation, because it was a very serious challenge for us to bring almost all educational programs to the virtual format. This cooperation was also discussed by the Minister of Education in October 2020, Minister of Culture in September 2020, and Communication Ministers in September 2020. We also had several youth and women forums which fostered cooperation between these very important, very critical social groups. Regardless of all these COVID-19 related challenges, I'm still optimistic, and I believe that BRICS not only will survive, but also will expand its cooperation both during the COVID-19 era and in the post-COVID-19 era. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sergunin, for sharing your thoughts. While you're closing your nice presentation and your insights in relation to the global governance and the BRICS, I'm gonna have the pleasure now to introduce Professor Dr. Fábio Borges. He has a postdoctorate degree in international relations from the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, PUC-Rio. He is also doctor in sociology, holder of master's degree in international relations and undergraduate degree in economics from São Paulo University, Júlio Mesquita Filho, UNESP. He is a professor at Federal University of Latin American Integration, UNILA, in Brazil since 2011, and he is also the coordinator of the research group, Decolonizing International Relations, the BRICS Observatory Extension Project, and South-South relations since 2019. The main current lines of research are international political economy, Amazon region geopolitics, BRICS, and South-South relations. Professor Dr. Fábio Borges, the floor is all yours. Thanks a lot again for sharing your thoughts with us during this fourth BRICS online conference in 2020.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to congratulate my fellow colleagues in this session, especially Ellen de Paula Bueno for the invitation. I'm going to talk about the new development bank under the new presidents. My presentation will be divided in 4 parts. First, profile of the new NDB president. How could Marcos Trujillo appointment will impact the NDB? Second, NDB's essence. Third, possible convergence and divergences between the Brazilian presidents in the bank and the essence of NDB. And the final remarks. Starting with the first part, it's interesting to point out that although the Bolsonaro government is characterized by little concern with the technical profile of its government officials in relation in the NDB nomination, we can see a certain coherence. Trujillo has an adequate profile to be president of NDB due to his academic background and professional experience. He is co-founder and served as director of the BRIC Lab at Columbia University. As we can see, he has the formation, he has worked in related BRICS areas. Trying to understand Trujillo's profile a little more deeply, we analyze his main publications. We can see the main publication here. In his doctoral thesis, Power and Prosperity, Trujillo points out Schumpeter and Prebisch as important influences for his theoretical perspective. In this way, the development, the creative destruction concept. In Schumpeterian analysis, there are regions and or countries that lead more creative destruction than others. The producers of economic expansion shocks are named in Schumpeter the cyclical centers, from which Prebisch later constituted the notion of a periphery. He has a critical perspective around the import substitution model. Disappointed trend settler nations versus trend takers nations. The center-periphery relationship in the contemporary world demands other strategies for taking off toward development. He also criticizes the North-South concepts. People and individuals are no longer dividing only between those who have and those who do not have. The gap is now increasingly between those who know and those who don't know. In the information economy, the traditional North-South divisions has gained a new name. It's the digital division. In his theoretical perspective, he divides the international system in two groups: borrowing countries versus trading countries. For countries with small saving rates in domestic investment, the path of development is alternatively either through external borrowing countries, or foreign trade, trading countries. In his publication, Desglobalization, Chronicle of a Changed World, he reinforced his liberal perspective for the economy, as we can see in the following quote. Sometimes I choose to put the Portuguese version, which is the original version, trying to be as faithful as possible to his ideas. In view of this situation, society and the state cannot waste time on activities of lesser importance. Freedom is also knowing what to privilege among the temptation of micromanagement of problems that can and should be solved within the individual sphere, or concentrate on the major themes in which the state can play an inducing role. Next, we will explain Trujillo's state theory, emphasizing that perhaps this perspective is too simplistic, limited for somebody who would like to lead the NB that was geopolitical ambitions. According to Trujillo's ideas, there are three types of states. In Portuguese, Estado Babão, Estado Alibaba, and Estado Farol. It's a little difficult to translate this concept, but I will try. A done state sleeps on the spot, does not establish rules, proposes nothing. Its nation means that through democracy, anti-democrats are increasingly dilapidating democracy itself. The second one, Alibaba state, one that established a hyper-codified, a kleptocratic bureaucracy whose main objective is, by means of pseudo-regulatory obstacles, to praise society for its riches, deprive it of its oxygen, of choice, and its freedom of creation. And finally, Farol state, one that induces, invites self-regulation, its sign of what national interests should be and the strategic tools to achieve them. It allows civil society full expression and unleashed of a broad productive forces. Another interesting concept that Trujillo constructed is the BRICS 2.0. In an interview in Roda Viva program, Trujillo talks about BRICS 2.0, seen not only under macroeconomic criteria of the concept of Jimmy O'Neill in 2001, former chief economist at Goldman Sachs. According to Trujillo, in the new version, the group of emerging countries, Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, reinvent the concept and also seek to implement global governance tools in the areas that interest them. Besides that, Trujillo was chair at meeting of the Ministers of Economy and Central Bank presidents of the BRICS countries in Washington in 2019. In this meeting, he points out what he considers the main challenges within the institution. The expansion of the number of the members of the NDB increase its performance beyond the BRICS, improve effectiveness of access to support offered by NDB in the preparation of structured investment projects, the advance of implementation with the scope of the BRICS of the programs of authorized economic operators, which will allow for faster process of trade flow between customs in the 5 countries. Marcos Trujillo spoke at the seminar O NDB e o Brasil, Parceria Estratégica para o Desenvolvimento Sustentável. The NDB has avoided a series of pitfalls. One of these pitfalls was represented by the bank trying to make a kind of focus of opposition to some of institutions created from the Bretton Woods experience. Anyone who likes to see the world as a confrontationist thought of the bank's emergence as a something what would suit that world vision of the world divided between North and South. On the importance of the BRICS banks, Trujillo explained, for instance, the problem of the conditionalities of the traditional institutions. If you are going to seek access to finance from many traditional multilateral institutions, the number and degree of complexity of conditionalities in many cases prevents affluence of projects that are minimally compatible with the need or speed at which they are demanded by its borrowers. Many of the plurilateral multinational institutions have a high degree of bureaucracy. Trujillo makes an important point that will be useful for our conclusion. Bank or BRICS? So do NDB has a leading role in this world. It is much more useful here if it gets closer to those 3 words, new, development, bank, than just the BRICS bank. That is, I think the institution was created also to add new members. This is a Brazilian position. We want new members to come together, not only to expand the geographic scope, but also to increase the sources of capitalization. I mean, he affirms the NDB should behave more as a bank with less geopolitical ambitions. We will now begin to analyze the essence of NDB and then to compare possible convergence and divergence with the Brazilian government today. The objective of financial infrastructure in sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emergency economy and developing countries. NDB's work completes the efforts of multilateral and regional financial institutions toward global growth and development. Its work is centered around maximizing the impact of development in a fast, flexible, efficient manner. The NDB is not opposing the other multilateral development banks. He is complementary to them. Mission. The NDB was formed to support infrastructure and sustainable development effort in BRICS and other underserved emerging economies for faster development through innovation and cutting-edge technology. The bank partners with nations through capital and knowledge, achieve development goals with transparency and empathy, creating an equal opportunity for the development of all countries. The NDB's main sectors of activity: clean energy, transport infrastructure, irrigation, sustainable urban development, economic cooperation integration among countries members. In the General Strategy 2017-2021, NDB aims to be innovative in 3 areas: relationship, projects adapted to the needs of each country, respecting their priorities and development strategies. Projects, sustainable infrastructure development is the core of NDB's 2017-2021 operating strategy. Approaches: be quick, flexible, and efficient by design, simplify project review, implementation, supervision without unnecessary bureaucracy. Another important objective in NDB is to achieve financial solidity. NDB has already received a AAA rating for 2 major Chinese domestic rating agencies. It has started engagement with major international rating agencies. International credit rating will facilitate NDB's access to global capital markets and allow more flexibility in the choice of fundraising instruments. In the next part, I will analyze possible convergences and divergences between the Brazilian presidents in the bank and the essence of NDB. In this manner, it's relevant to remember a quote from a former president of NDB. Now, in the 5th year of its operation, the bank is a fully functional institution in all respects. It is also an institution that has the strategic agility and strong execution capability to shift gears, refocus as required by emerging challenges and opportunity, as well as the evolving environment. NDB's performance in 2019 is a further testament to its progress on this journey. In 2019, we approved 22 projects amount $7.2 billion, including our first equity investment in Brazil. Our cumulative projects approved cross $15 billion in the 50 years of operation, a considerably short period of time than it works some other established MDBs to reach a milestone. An overview. For NDB itself, there are interesting financial innovations that can be adopted to mobilize equity-like instruments from the markets. This will require, more critically, the support of your members. I believe that the adoption of this innovation can help the bank grow its assets to nearly $120 billion with just $10 billion of initial per capital provided by the fund members. You would place the bank in the top tier of MDBs globally, and I believe could be a vision of the bank for the future. Now we'll appoint possible convergences between the Brazilian presidents in the bank in the essence of NDB. Itamaraty currently collaborates with the Federal Government Investment Partnership Program, PPE, to obtain foreign investment in the infrastructure area. In my opinion, there will be a convergence between Brazilian economic politics that's privilege privatization of infrastructure and one of NDB priorities. On the other hand, I see possible divergences between the Brazilian presidents and the NDB. A foreign policy totally subservient to the USA, current government has a disastrous environment policy. In the COVID-19 pandemic, Brazil stands out negatively and with a dose of xenophobia in relation to China. Trujillo has strong neoliberal views to run a bank with geopolitical ambitions. Yeah, final remarks. The appointment by the Brazilian government of Marcos Trujillo to be the president of NDB is consistent with the transformation in the BRICS NDB, and with the Trujillo's professional experience. Both the bank, its presidents, will have to reconcile this transformation with the geopolitical logics that exced the NDB. The BRICS is inserted to a broader context in the international system, conflicting between USA and China. It's not clear that the changes in the NDB has been going through will make it lose its geopolitical dimension. Finally, China's predominance in the institution may call into question dogmatic neoliberal views. Well, thanks so much. Sorry about my English.
Professor Dr. Fábio Borges, thank you very much for your nice presentation and insights in relation to the new development bank. Now I'm gonna give the floor to Professor Dr. Evandro Menezes de Carvalho. Professor Evandro, he's a professor of international law and head of the Center for Brazil-China Studies at Getúlio Vargas Foundation School of Law in Rio de Janeiro. He is also a professor of international law and member of the Center of BRICS Countries Studies at Fluminense Federal University School of Law in Brazil. He's also a PhD in international law at University of São Paulo, a member of the permanent body of the Getúlio Vargas Foundation Chamber of Mediation and Arbitration, and also legal consultant at Veiranos Law Firm's China desk. He was a senior scholar at Shanghai University of Finance and Economics with the support of the Organization of American States and China Scholarship Council Program. He was senior foreign expert at Center for BRICS Studies at Fudan University and also a visiting professor at Shanghai University under the recruitment program of high-end foreign experts, and visiting professor of the School of Government of the Beijing Normal University. In February 2015, Mr. Carvalho was one of the 60 foreign experts, including 2 economists awarded the Nobel Prize, which were invited to take part in the meeting of consultation of foreign experts with the Premier Li Keqiang. I'm sorry, but I could not ignore all this previous experience that you had, Professor Evandro. The floor is all yours. Please welcome and join us. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation to join us during this 4th conference of BRICS 2020.
Thank you very much, José Ricardo, and also Professor Ellen Bueno for inviting me to take part of this 4th BRICS conference 2020. It's very important to continue to discuss this topic, mainly in this current scenario we are living. And I really enjoyed the speech delivered by Professor Alexsander and also Professor Fábio. First, because Professor Alexsander gave us a very good overview about the chairmanship of Russia this year, and also Professor Fábio brought a very interesting discussion between the NDB, the current presidency, but mainly, I think the role between NDB and the BRICS, and his conclusion was very interesting, very insightful as well. So I would like to, of course, we could discuss many topics here, and we have a lot of, a lot of items and initiatives developed by BRICS countries a lot of challenges and concrete initiatives, but also we are living a time that some old ideas and mindset is coming again. Some people talk about the kind of a new Cold War, and we have the pandemic and also a discussion about the future of the world, and all of this we have to consider as well. So I just prepare a short speech to bring some discussions, and sometimes it's very hard to say some or share some thoughts. And anyway, I think it's important. So the pandemic exposed the international political tensions arising from China's economic expansion and the dispute over more efficient governance models adapt to the present demands and challenges. One declaration given by an international authority brought this debate in the midst of one of the greatest pandemics in the history of humanity. The Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, about the measures taken by the Chinese government to contain the epidemic of COVID-19, declared that the Chinese president would have shown the type of, quotation marks, political leadership, close quotation marks, that is expected from countries facing a public health crisis of such magnitude. And while highlighting China's commitment to multilateralism and peace, he also said, quotation marks, in fact, they, is referring about the Chinese people, Chinese government, are protecting the rest of the world, close quotation marks. Trump's reaction was soon to come, and in its wake, that of the new Brazilian extreme right-wing movement. Since the USSR's dismantling, there was a belief that the liberal democracy model would irresistible expand across the world under the patronage and hegemony of the United States. This scenario was challenging due to three factors: the unexpected crisis of democracies in the 21st century. Second, the emergence of communism renewed by China and adapted for competition in the global market. And finally, third, the return of Nazi-fascist demonstrations and acts in several Western countries. Democracy, communism, and Nazi-fascism represent systems of thought and modes of political and economic organization in a society. These three ideologies fought a deadly struggle in the first half of the 20th century. It was believed that Nazi-fascism had been defeated in World War II. It was also believed that communism had lost its economic and military strength in 1989, and that democracy was solid enough not to be challenged anymore. These three ideologies are moving towards meeting at a crossroads that does not resemble that of the past. This process was undoubtedly accelerated by the America First doctrine of United States President Donald Trump, who refused the American leadership's burden in maintaining the international order after World War II. American foreign policy takes a unilateralist bias to detriment of its traditional allies. In the explicit defense of its national interests, the United States risks sacrificing multilateralism and deepening the crisis of legitimacy and the efficacy of international organizations. Such an example would be the World Trade Organization. Since 2018, Trump has threatened to pull the United States out of the WTO because his country has been unsuccessful in almost any trade dispute with China under the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism. Despite his complaint, a Newsweek article states that, quotation marks, the statistics compiled by the Peterson Institute for International Economics show that the United States wins more cases against China than the other way around, close quotation marks. Following the disapproval policy of international organizations, the United States in 2019, officially withdraws from UNESCO, claiming that the organization has taken an anti-Israel bias. More recently, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Trump announced the suspension of WHO funding and the withdrawal of the United States from this organization, arguing that the organization had failed to report the seriousness of the situation in the city of Wuhan, China, where the epidemic would have arisen. But there is another argument that justifies the American president's dissatisfaction. Trump accuses the WHO of being too focused on China. The diplomatic crisis between the two major powers began when Trump, in the midst of the trade war against China, started accusing the Chinese company Huawei of illegally obtaining data through the infrastructure it sells to telecommunications companies. This crisis is compounded when Trump makes political use of the pandemic by calling COVID-19 a Chinese virus, reviving xenophobia in his country. Research applied in March this year, published by Pew Research Center, shows that about 2/3 of Americans now have an unfavorable view of China. That would be the highest negative rating since 2005. In this context of a dispute between the United States and China, Brazilian Congressman Eduardo Bolsonaro, president of the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Commission of the House of Representatives, caused one of Brazil's diplomatic crises with China. The question that remains unanswered is, in defense of which national interest did the Brazilian congressman bring that crisis with the country that is our biggest trading partner since 2009? China's ambassador to Brazil, Yang Wanmin, reacted sharply by stating that the congressman's statement is a quotation mark, blatant anti-China attitude. For the newspaper El País, Eduardo Bolsonaro has been behaving as a disciplined defender of White House interests in Brazil, including campaigning against the participation of a Chinese company in the auction of 5G technology. So we can see that there is this perception about some part of the Brazilian government, not the total government. The diplomatic tensions seem to have been solved when President Bolsonaro called to Chinese President Xi Jinping in March. However, a few days later, that congressman, his son, provoked China by referring to COVID-19 as a Chinese virus as well. Almost a month later, on April, the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ernesto Araújo, publishes on his blog a short text entitled, "The commune virus has arrived." Commune virus is a word, mixed with communism and virus, which ferociously criticized an article by Marxist philosopher Slavoj Žižek, and for the Brazilian minister, quotation mark, "The coronavirus makes us wake up again to the communist nightmare," close mark. Close quotation mark. Since there would be he said, appropriation of the pandemic to subvert liberal democracy and the market economy completely, close quotation mark. He also condemns Zizek's proposal for granting more power to international organizations such as WHO. For the Brazilian minister, open quotation marks, transferring national powers to WHO under the pretext, never proven, he said, that a centralized international body is more efficient in dealing with problems than countries acting individually is only the first step in building communist planetary solidarity, close quotation marks. The debate on governance models and the future of the international order is a current issue. If the statement by WHO's Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus mentioned at the beginning of my short speech may sound overly complacent with China, on the other hand, it cannot be ignored that the Chinese government has been sending, for example, medical supplies to over 100 countries, contrasting with the USA's attitude accused of diverting medical equipment that would go to Germany, France, and Brazil as well. The international solidarity to fight against COVID-19 is perceived by the Brazilian Minister of Foreign Affairs as contrivance for spreading communism in the world. But the fact has shown that the states need to guarantee medical treatment for all those infected, provide financial aid for the poorest people and economic relief for small business, etc. And these policies call into question the credibility of the liberal economic measures that have been implemented so far by the Brazilian and United States governments before the pandemic. They state the importance to relieve the economic and social consequences of the pandemic, and the international solidarity have challenged those people attached to the theory of a minimum state, grounded on a model of society based on each one for himself. They used to consider this statement as synonymous with freedom when it has become to expression of individualism, to remember the idea of America first. The so-called invisible hand of the market has lived up to its invisibility in this moment of a public health crisis. After all, although some companies have made some contributions to fight off the virus, it is not then that we transfer the responsibility for our nation's fate. In this context of the crisis of international organizations and the rise of ideological disputes that remind us of a kind of a new Cold War, BRICS must find solutions for these problems and try to continue to be relevant. When BRICS emerged more than 10 years ago, the 5 countries had a clear reformist agenda for international organizations. The challenge was mainly external to the BRICS. Currently, the challenge is within the BRICS as a platform. The Brazilian government is not really engaged to the multilateralism and brought to its foreign policy the ideological clash that it had installed on domestic arena. The alignment with the United States, the insistence on joining the OECD, attacks China, and flirting with Taiwan puts Brazil on a collision course, not only with China, but with the original idea of BRICS. Of course, diplomacy will deny these facts. But the denial of the fact is another symptom of our time. It also seems clear that the political, diplomatic, and even academic discourse that pretends that none of these facts are happening is becoming increasingly unsustainable. Let's put this clear definitely. Currently, BRICS is not a priority for the Brazilian government. However, over its more than 10 years, BRICS has done something that could be its lifeline. I refer to the forums that precede the summit and involve the most diverse sectors of society in the 5 countries. BRICS has sought to involve civil society in discussing this platform's direction and in defining its agenda. BRICS Business Forum, BRICS Youth Forum, BRICS Women Forum, BRICS Legal Forum, etc., has given BRICS vitality and sustained its legitimacy. In the current context of so much adversity, it's necessary to pay more attention to these forums. Besides, it's important to continue the outreach dialogues and BRICS Plus. Considering the current context, I believe that the time has come for the BRICS to support and sponsor a global agenda in defense of the international system's democratization. That is, in defense of multilateralism and the strengthening of international organizations, combined with the greater promotion of dialogue between peoples. Finally, a message for Brazilians, for my friends, my colleagues. I would like to end this concise speech with Bobbio's lessons about the post-war that can help me think about the present. He said, after the war was over and fascism was abolished, 2 fundamental problems were standing before us. The democratic order within our country and the peaceful order in relations between our country and the rest of the world, he said. So it is worth asking whether, now it's not Bobbio, it is worth asking whether both systems are currently under threat. It means the democratic order within our country and the peaceful order in relation with other countries. The diplomatic crisis with China may give us some tips to answer that question. After all, attacking China does not mean defending Brazilian democracy, but disrupting the organizing principle of our peaceful relations with the world as legally established by our federal constitution. Moreover, on the defense of the democratic order in our country, importing to Brazil a political tension that beholds the order as an enemy can cause irreversible damage to our own multi-party democracy. Anyone in Brazil who insists on this ideological tension cannot be said to be a Democrat. To conclude, we need to escape these political pitfalls that drive the world into conflict, given that some governments in some countries are committed to an agenda for the destruction of multilateralism and the division of the world. To resume its original agenda, BRICS must reinforce its agenda of supporting the multilateralism between states and people's unity. So this is my very short message to our reflection. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Mr. José Ricardo. Thank you.
I think that we're having very fruitful insights from our keynote speakers. Thanks a lot, Professor Dr. Evandro Menezes de Carvalho, for such valuable information and insights that you shared with us. Now I'm going to give the floor to Professor Dr. Cássio Eduardo Zen, who is also a PhD in international law from the University of São Paulo. He is also a researcher, a colleague of mine at GEBRICS USP, and legal secretary and researcher at the Center for Studies of International Protection of Minorities. Professor Dr. Cássio Eduardo Zen, please do welcome. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, José. I will start to share my screen. Let's hope it works fine. Let's see if you can.
Yes, perfectly.
See, yes. So it has a bit of delay. I will speak with a chronometer this time. So, well, what would be my presentation? My main fear, my main problem when I decided to try to speak about minorities in BRICS countries, I said, oh, this can be a political nightmare. But my perspective, I will attempt not to show the bad side or the violations of minority rights in BRICS countries. I will focus on the brighter side. I will do my best to show the good things that each country has done and how diverse we are as not only countries, but as cultures. So starting with Brazil. Brazil is a vast country. This is a photo related to Umbanda, which is a local religion, relatively widespread in Brazil. People do practice in all over the country. We have a national plan of culture that is stated in our constitution, Article 215. And the general principle is the value of regional and ethnical diversity in Brazil. We have the goods, material and immaterial goods related to the groups that formed Brazilian society. They are recognized as national cultural property, and therefore they have constitutional protection in Brazil. Only one language in Brazil is recognized as official state language, Portuguese, but there is the right of indigenous people to be educated in their own in their own local language. We have in Brazil the Fundação Nacional do Índio, which is FUNAI, National Foundation for Indians. It was established by law, and rather ancient law that must be updated, but we have this foundation that is mainly responsible for demarcation of indigenous lands. So you can see this map. It has the yellow parts are the already regular recognized areas. We also have some red areas which are still under study and may have new updates. The indigenous populations here in Brazil, they have their social organizations, languages, creeds, traditions, all assured by our Constitution, Article 231. And we also have in Brazil the so-called quilombos and the Fundação Palmares. Quilombos are communities that were founded by escaped slaves in our slavery past in Brazil. And they are dedicated, the Fundação Palmares is dedicated to protect African Brazilian heritage, including quilombos. The current director is very much criticized by members of the community, but this is another discussion. Our most important case law is Raposa Serra do Sol, which decided the right of continuous area of demarcation, but also recognized that Brazilian armed forces have the right to patrol the area. The federal union has the right to build infrastructure in the area. They must protect biodiversity. Non-indigenous people may enter. There may be some limits, and tolls are forbidden. You can see it was a very delicate case because it is right on the border with Guyana and Venezuela. So it's pretty much a border area where one of the largest indigenous areas was recognized in Brazil. There was a recent development, the advisory opinion on 2017 of the Federal Legal Office, which is basically the state council, federal council for legal issues. They advised against any further demarcation of indigenous area, but this advisory opinion was rejected by the Supreme Federal Court. It blocked possible effects, and they issued an injunction this year, a couple of months ago, to protect indigenous land, recognizing the threat to indigenous populations due to COVID pandemic. And this is a photo of the people asking, it's in Portuguese, but I translate, the indigenous people of Amazonas state ask for help. And what this help would be? Well, last week I spoke with a student here in my city, which is from an indigenous tribe, and she narrated me, she told me about the horrors her people, her community is facing due to fire and destruction on September 2020. And she's saying that the fires were probably criminally started to clear space for agricultural farms. And she told me horror stories about people having to collect bodies of her community because people just died in the fire. It was just horrible. We also have in Brazil the Registration of Cultural Goods, Institute of Historical and Artistic Patrimonium. We have 48 recognized immaterial cultural goods in Brazil, including Mercado de Bebê de Mercado, a religious celebration, and the office of guava pen workers. This is the guava pen workers. They have this traditional technique, which is protected by Brazilian law. And we also have this Bembe de Mercado, which is a religious cultural celebration by a state. These are the different dialects in Brazil. We have at least 15 dialects, 16 dialects. We also have different languages. I'm not speaking about languages, I'm speaking about dialects. Some of them are under the brink of extinction. And my colleagues in São Paulo, they speak a probably different dialect from me. If I speak in, we can speak all in Portuguese, but it is rather different. This is an area in the city of Florianópolis, which is called Ribeirão da Ilha, and they have a dialect that is basically disappearing. It's still Portuguese. It would be impossible for you to understand in São Paulo if they spoke in their traditional dialect very fast, but I think it's still possible. We have 250 different languages, and only 2 are recognized, the Portuguese and sign language. Brazil hosted a seminar of recovery of indigenous minority languages. So basically, this is the framework in Brazil. We also have
Professor,
the national
sorry to
inventory.
interrupt you, but your screen is not being shared with us. So
this is really bad. Let's see again.
please try again. Thank you.
Okay, now, what about now?
Yes, National Inventory of Linguistic Diversity.
Yes,
yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
We are the only BRICS country to have ratified ILO Convention on Migrants and Indigenous Work. Regarding Russia, we have a huge territorial extension. As you may see, before we had the USSR, and the USSR had this map shows everything. We had people from Baltic countries, here from Suomi people, up to the far Siberia. We have a lot of minorities and well, stated that national minorities and the way Russian authorities act towards minorities have been critical to Russia's survival over the centuries. And these are the Ngасан people. As you may notice, the name is written on a not in Cyrillic alphabet. They don't even use the Cyrillic alphabet. So this is one characteristic of the group. And the Russian constitution, they consider themselves a multinational people. They start by saying they are the multinational people of the Russian Federation. And while the sovereignty still rests in Russian Federation, there is one country that is Russia. The barrier of sovereignty, according to Russian constitution, is Russia's multinational people. Everyone has the right to use his or her native language, to a free choice of language of communication, of bringing education. And they have equal rights regardless of sex, race, nationality, language, origin, property, and official status, religion, and public association, and also other circumstances. However, we would like to point that Article 68 of Russian Constitution was recently amended this year, and Russian now is considered the language of state-forming people. It is still unclear what the practical impact of this change will be in Russia. They have also the Temple of All Religions in Russia, still under construction, which is a rather curious aspect because they have a synagogue, they have a mosque, and they have Christian churches. They have the third largest Yazidi population in the world, and Yazidis are usually a forgotten minority, a religious minority. They have the Center for Support of Indigenous People in the North Russian Indigenous Training Center. As you may see here, you have the Sami people in the Russian far north. It was shut down by a Moscow court in November 2019. Still, there is a possibility of a constitutional appeal. Some groups in Russia have their own languages and the status of indigenous small-numbered people, and they have less than 50,000 people, and Russian law grants them special rights to land and preservation of traditional lifestyle. These are the Nenets in this photo. And as you may see, there are some groups within the Nenets community which have only one native speaker, one linguistic minority with only one speaker. The Russian Federation, still according to their constitution, shall guarantee the rights of indigenous small people according to universally recognized principles and norms of international treaties and agreements signed by the Russian Federation. There is one issue that I identified with the Ahisha Mehketian Turks, which were deported from Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic, and today they still use, many people still use the Soviet passports as their only identification document. Some of them are in the Russian Federation, so they claim the right to a possible stateless, maybe, passport, but they still don't, they have to use a Soviet passport, which is rather a big problem because the Soviet Union does not exist anymore. Well, Russian authorities have also conducted a statistical study of languages in Russia. Some of them, Yug, Duk, they only have one native speaker and risk extinction. The new education law draft bill may change teaching of minority languages in Russia, and they give the perspective of choice, which can or cannot jeopardize. It's still unclear what the practical effects of this educational law change will be. Regarding India, these are the Jaipan minorities, if I'm not forgotten, a religious minority, and there are some rights that are assured by the Indian constitution, including the right to bear a kipan. The kipan is this ceremonial knife, ceremonial dagger used by them. It's assured in the constitution by the Sikhs. The 2011 census recognized over 1,000 mother tongues grouped in over more than 100 linguistic groups, and the constitution recognizes 22 languages in India, while Hindi is the majority language, and English, as you may notice, English is not yet recognized as an official language in India, but it's used for government purposes as well. There are demands to include other 38 languages there. Constitution also states that they have the right to conserve the language, the linguistic minorities, and no citizen shall be denied admission in education institution due to language, race, religion, caste, or any distinction. Article 30 provides protection for ethnical and religious educational institutions. There is the National Commission for Minorities, which recognize Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, and Jains as religious minorities. The Commission may look into complaints regarding deprivation of rights and safeguards of minorities and take matters to the authorities. Now, related to China, as their own constitution states, is a country with one of the longest histories in the world. And the people of all ethnical groups in China have jointly created a culture of grandeur and have a glorious revolutionary tradition. So there is one country, China, but there is different ethnical groups. This is recognized by Chinese constitution. The state will do its utmost to protect the common property of all ethnical groups, and there are 56 recognized ethnical groups by the Chinese government, while Han is the biggest group, 91% of Chinese population, and the latest recognized group was the Jinwo, which you can see the picture. It was recognized in 1979. We also have, this is the city where they live. I forgot to write down the name of the city, so I'm so sorry. This is an ethno-linguistic map of China. As you may see, there is one country, which is China. You can see the borders, but you can see a huge diversity of languages in China. Some languages have official status in autonomous region, such as Tibetan language in Tibet Autonomous Region, and the Mongolian language recognized as a regional language in Inner Mongolia. I have the information that the classes have been suspended in 2020 due to COVID-19. I believe they will be restored as soon as the pandemic gives us a break. There is also a regional language recognized in Macau, which is Portuguese. And in Hong Kong, English is also recognized as an official language. There is the National People's Congress Ethnic Affairs Committee, which was suspended only during the Cultural Revolution, and mission includes the protection of rights of ethnic minorities. There is the National Committee of the Chinese People Political Consultative Conference, which is a political advisory body which stressed the need to protect ethnical affairs in urban development. Mao Zedong's thought, he wrote the concept of Han chauvinism, and he considered the prevalence of one ethnical group above others would be an intolerable situation, and he defended the Chinese multi-ethnical society. While today, Mr. Xi Jinping, he wrote the concept of Chinese Dream, which is based on ethnical unity and incentives to inter-ethnic marriages. And how could this apparent conflict we be deserve one nation? And I took a look on what Mr. Xi Jinping defended. He said that through protecting a multi-ethnic Chinese society united as one group, it is not about having different countries. It is about having one country with different ethnical minorities. And what Mr. Xi Jinping believes is, he said that ethnic diversity is China's strong point, and he called the different people in China to respect the differences. He also highlighted the importance of cultural self-confidence in China. So there is the idea of unity in China with diversity of people, a strong point, and with protection of minority rights and cultural reliance. This is Xi Jinping's doctrine. South Africa has 11 official languages. I'm still believing I'm going to finish in 5 minutes. Census does not focus on indigenous groups, nor does the country have a law exclusively dedicated to indigenous group. Most of the advancements in South Africa are based in constitutional law. The census asks what your race is: Black, African, colored, Indian or Asian, white or other. Values of the Republic of South Africa include human dignity, equality, non-racialism, and non-sexism. They recognize the historically diminished use and status of indigenous language of people, and the state of South Africa must take practical and positive measures to elevate the status and advance the use of these languages. So they establish a Pan-South African Language Board, which has the purpose of protecting languages. They can use for translation, linguistic human education, research and development, standardization. They cannot unfairly discriminate against anyone on grounds such as gender, sexual orientation, belief, language, culture, and everyone has the right to use the language and to participate in their own cultural life, but no one exercising these rights may do so in a manner inconsistent to any provision of the Bill of Rights. This is some speaker of the Saccoin language. There is one major issue regarding the Richterfeld mining operations, and the Supreme Court, the Nama people have obtained a ruling in the South African Constitutional Court recognizing the indigenous ownership of the land. The court also recognized the land ownership was set under an indigenous legal system, while the Roman Germanic legal system was imposed on them. So this is a constitutional court recognition of a legal system belonging to indigenous people. This is what happened recently related to the mining operations, and still the situation is unclear how it will unfold. Everyone in South Africa has the right to freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion. There was the Witchcraft Suppression Act of 1957 and the Mpumalanga Witchcraft Suppression Act of 2007, recent, and this motivated a review of the legislation, and it was considered unconstitutional. So the South African Law Reform Commission deemed these witchcraft acts illegal against the Constitution. There is also the Commission for Promotion of and Protection of Rights of Cultural and Linguistic Communities, which can hear complaints and must and takes action to further respect and protection of rights of cultural, religious, linguistic communities. And well, the conclusion so far, there is legal basis in BRICS countries to determine that the state is responsible to protect multilateralism, multiculturalism. We have different countries, 5 different BRICS countries, which have a very strong point, as Xi Jinping said. They have a very strong point, a strong asset, which is their own national diversity. As Russian constitution says, we are a multinational community, not only of 5 countries, but as hundreds of nations inside our countries. There is a need to add a new perspective in BRICS studies, thinking not only about nation states, but as individuals and people who live in the BRICS countries. It is an untapped source of cultural significance to the BRICS. And I would like to end by quoting, I have spoken with Cacique, which is an indigenous chief in Brazil, and she told me that this fight is also yours. It is in your interest that we survive. It is in our interest, our struggle. And we fight to protect something that it's part of Brazil. Protecting minorities, protecting languages, it is about protecting our own countries. Obrigado, spasiba, davabat, xie, and thank you. I will now stop sharing here.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Cássio Eduardo, for your presentation about minorities, diversity. And I think that you concluded really, really well, telling that the BRICS is a group that is a multinational community. Thank you very much. On behalf of Professor Paulo Casella and the senior founders of GEBRICS, including Professor Ellen Bueno, Dr. Vitor Arruda Pereira Oliveira, and Dr. José Nantala, I would like to thank you all the professors who shared their thoughts here today with us, and also the audience who attended this plenary session. Unfortunately, we will not have time enough for the questions, but if the audience has any question, please feel free to send us an email later on, and we're going to be really glad to share this information with all the professors who attended this panel. I will also remind you that we're going to have within 20 minutes, the plenary session 3, which is about infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging economies. Thank you all. You all have a nice rest. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now